How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 1.
Hello, America. Welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number, 877-973-7425, should you wish to be on the program. Glad to have you with me today. I want to hit the ground running because I've been waiting to get behind the microphone to be able to discuss this. Now, one programming note for you, though, before I begin. At the bottom of this hour, Senator Pete Ricketts is going to join me. He's the senator from Nebraska because, as you may have heard, the Biden administration is moving forward rapidly with regulations to ban fossil fuel burning vehicles, and Senator Ricketts is one of the leading Republicans pushing back on that in the Senate. So glad to be able to get him here to talk about that. I'm going to preface this by saying I'm going to reference something religious, but this is not a theological conversation. This is raw, practical politics. But today is, if you're a Christian, Holy Monday. And Holy Monday is Christians meditate on two events that happen in the final week of the life of Jesus. The first is Christ going into the temple, overturning the tables, throwing out the money changers, and the other is the withering of the fig tree. For those of you who are not familiar with the story, Christ enters triumphantly on Palm Sunday, that was celebrated yesterday in Christian churches, as a king, and then within 24 hours, he's in the temple overthrowing tables, chasing out the money lenders, and then causes a fig tree to wither. I want to focus on us as conservatives cleansing our political temples, the idols we've made, because something big happened, and it was the absence of the news that probably should be the bigger news than the event that happened, and that is the $1.2 trillion spending package has passed Congress. Temporary government shutdown with the Senate delayed passing it, but it happened, and what it did is it just continued to grow the government spending. Now, I bring this up in part because I was, and he won't mind me saying this, by text message chastised a little bit by my buddy Chip Roy, great congressman and a dear friend, who we hold each other accountable. And he's like, oh, why is everybody giving up? Why are you saying we got a 1-2 seat majority so we can't do anything? We should still be coming up with a plan. And I want to play for you some audio from Chip. This was him with Jake Tapper on CNN over the weekend.
Look, I think Speaker Johnson, I've been public about this, made a mistake when he walked away from the bipartisan caps and a CR that could have put pressure on my Democratic colleagues to come to the table. That was a mistake. I don't think this bill was reflective of what the American people want. It expands government, increases spending, increases debt, doesn't secure the border, doesn't do what we need to do, advances a radical agenda, doesn't make our defense focused on mission instead of social engineering. I think we should have changed those things. Now, let's get busy. But I can promise you, if you put a Ukraine bill on the floor and you haven't secured the border, there's going to be a problem within the ranks on Capitol Hill. So let's focus on doing our job. There are people across the spectrum. And here's another thing. All last year, we had great conversations. Brian Fitzpatrick, some of the New York delegation, myself, Mike Garcia in California, moderates, conservatives, figuring out how to advance the ball. And we passed the Limit, Save, Grow. Conservatives voted to increase the debt ceiling. We'd never done that before. We passed the strongest border security bill we've ever passed. Yeah. We hadn't done that in years. We passed appropriations bills. These are all things we can do if we'll just come together and work on it. But we better get our act together over Easter so we can deliver for the American people.
So he's right. He is right. And I got to call myself out a little bit on this, on just saying, well, we've only got 2 seats. There's nothing we can do. But it's not just me. It's the entirety of the conservative movement right now seems to lack any sort of focus on having the backs of people like Chip Roy. Now, here's the reality, and it is what we're dealing with, and I'm a realist here. The Wall Street Journal had this over the weekend. If you subscribe to the show notes, you can text DATA to 33777 to do that. There are 72 Republicans and 168 Democrats who have voted for all 6 spending bills. And there are 55 Republicans who have voted against all 6 spending bills. There are 92 Republicans who have voted back and forth. There are 45 Democrats who have voted back and forth. 82 voted with the coalition on average each bill. 42 votes the coalition has to have to get over a 2/3 vote. The way the House is working, because they don't think they can hold Republicans together, is they're voting with a suspension of the rules, and it requires a 2/3 vote to get things done in the House. And it essentially requires a bipartisan governing coalition. Now my point here on the other side, I think, to my buddy Chip and others, is we're seeing constantly with this 2-vote threshold on the Republican side that 1 or 2 Republicans every single time are willing to be the turd in the punch bowl and sabotage anything the Republicans do. And this all gets back to Matt Gaetz, who decided to sabotage this brilliant plan Republican moderates and conservatives came up with to cut real spending, and he decided to throw McCarthy under the bus at the time. Chip was opposed to that at the time, but Gaetz and a few others decided to upend the whole thing, and we haven't been able to win since. And I do think that that was the moment that broke the spirit of House Republicans working together. But this is larger than House Republicans. Today, Christians focus on throwing the moneylenders out of the temple, and conservatives, I do wonder if we should be doing a better job of throwing the grifters out of our movement. And I say that because you have a guy like Chip Roy, who is one of the most principled conservatives in Congress, who's going down to the floor, getting the arrows shot at him, all the heat, for standing up and defying his Republican leadership, for pointing out that what we're doing is growing a framework that Nancy Pelosi agreed to with very little change except change that benefits the Democrats. Where the hell's the conservative movement on this? Apparently last week they were all having a party somewhere in the building while Chip Roy was standing on the floor fighting. At the beginning of this Congress, excuse me, at the beginning of this Congress, outside conservative groups were willing to get together prior to Congress being sworn in 2023 and plot a way to block Kevin McCarthy from becoming Speaker without extracting serious concessions for conservatives. And it seems like they spent all of their energy on doing that quite effectively, I might add. They may have gotten McCarthy a Speaker, but they got great concessions, and they hadn't done anything ever since. Where is the leadership from the outside conservative movement saying, guys, I realize we've only got 2 seats, but there should be consequences? There can be consequences. When you have 72 Republicans who have voted for every single spending resolution, I guarantee you there are Republicans there who can be held accountable. And of the 55 who oppose everything and just say no with conservative groups, there's surely accountability there as well. One of the purposes of the outside conservative movement operations must be accountability for members of Congress. You all have scorecards. Too many of them are now just to affirm leadership or to condemn leadership. And we're leaving guys like Chip on the floor of the House to do all the heavy lifting himself. The government has grown in part because the conservative movement entities did not get in a room together and figure out how can we come up with a plan to go to the Speaker of the House, who right now seems to be listening to the hawks and the committee chairman and not to the conservative movement from which he is a part, and who can blame him given the dynamics of the House, when you don't have a conservative movement coming to him with some intellectual firepower saying, here is a plan to shake this up. Yes, it's going to be a fight. Yes, you're going to have to hold on to some members, but we can on the outside give you the intellectual framework and the firepower and the cudgel to hold your own members in alignment so that we can cut some real spending. Where is the outside conservative movement? I'll tell you where they are. They've been busy platforming people like Candace Owen, who chants Christ is King while espousing anti-Semitism. They've been peddling Tucker Carlson's Vladimir Putin propaganda. They've been elevating guys like Charlie Kirk, who runs TPUSA, as a grifting operation to raise a bunch of money off old people, claiming they need $100 million to do a ballot operation in just 3 states. For the record, you could do the whole nation for far less than that. We're platforming a bunch of people because either they're young white guys or they're young black women, and these are the faces of the future of the conservative movement, and they're not particularly accomplished. They're carrying water for one politician in particular. They don't have an ideological core to them, and to the extent they do, they're anti-Semites in Candace Owens' example. The conservative movement has been distracted by the shiny object. And frankly, they've been distracted by Donald Trump. Donald Trump is not going to give you intellectual leading light moments, conservative movement. Donald Trump is about Donald Trump, and you all know it's true, and you may want to vote for him, and that's just fine and dandy, but you're going to have parts of the conservative movement come up with the intellectual framework over which he operates, and you can't wait for him to get there because every day brings us closer to the fiscal cliffs. Where is the leadership of the conservative movement willing to partner with the Speaker of the House and the Republicans and say, look, we realize you have a 2-seat majority, but here is our idea. We're going to rally our movement. We're going to have our people call members of Congress. We're going to engage on your behalf. We're going to let Republicans know that people in their district support this. We really do want you to fight on this issue. None of that has been there. What good is a conservative movement if they're just waiting for Donald Trump to lead when Donald Trump is going to lead without ideas? He's going to get his ideas from others. And guess where those ideas are going to come from? If the conservative movement doesn't lead, they're going to come from other people who may not offer conservative ideas. Donald Trump grew the government when he was president of the United States. We need to overturn the tables within the conservative movement, I think. We have too many grifters now. We have too many organizations that exist to fundraise off their base without anything to show for it. And what do we have? A $1.2 trillion spending package. And myself and others, I get it's real easy for us to say, we got a 2-seat majority. There's not much we can do. But we didn't even preserve the status quo. We grew government yet again. And we left hanging the good guys, some of whom are getting fed up. I understand Congress is a clown show. It is. And it's more of a clown show now when the majority can be held hostage by just 1 or 2 people. It is. And I understood that there was a lot of firepower and intellectual activity poured into a spending package that would have amounted to real cuts, only to have it sabotaged by Matt Gaetz. But you know what? You people who wanted that plan, who rolled it back, you're still treating him like a hero instead of making him a pariah, sabotaging what we could have had with real cuts. Instead, we're growing the government and you're patting him on the back because he grandstands and performs for you on camera. I don't know that the conservative movement is serious about conserving anything. And there are a lot of populists who have infiltrated it and said, what does the conservative movement conserve? Well, we've conserved the Second Amendment. We've conserved homeschooling. We've conserved a lot of families. We've conserved school choice expansion. We've conserved Dobbs getting rid of Roe v. Wade. We've conserved free speech. We've conserved a lot. It doesn't mean we're going to stand pat, dig our heels in, and never advance society. That's not what conservatism is about. But conservatism is certainly about elevating families and being fiscally responsible. And the conservative movement has seemed to be real quiet of late on fiscal responsibility. We're all chasing culture war idols as we run off the fiscal cliff. As Christians, much of which the conservative movement are, sit around on Holy Monday and meditate over that withered fig tree that bore no fruit when their Lord and Savior, when its Lord and Savior commanded it. What fruit are we in the conservative movement bearing right now? A $1.2 trillion spending package, and the good guys having to do all the heavy lifting on the floor of the House while the conservative movement hangs out in parties and waits for Donald Trump to return to the White House. You can return to a White House and then we can go over the fiscal cliff together and declare the nation bankrupt because conservatives don't seem to be interested in fighting much for anything. Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number, 877-973-7425. So there's a church out in Arizona, Yosemite Baptist Church in San Luis, Arizona. For 23 years, it has provided food for anyone who wanted it. So the way this came about is 23 years ago, a woman showed up in 1999 with 500 pounds of food. No one wanted it, and so she showed up at the church and said, "Do y'all want the food?" And the church organized a food bank and had given away all 500 pounds of food in 24 hours and expanded from there. And it has been a massive operation for this church since 1999, giving away thousands of pounds of food a week. The pastor is from Mexico. Well, there's a new Democratic mayor in the city. And you know what? The local Democratic mayor has decided that the church should not be providing food to people and has conjured all sorts of excuses to block the church. My friends at the First Liberty Institute, I actually spoke to an event of theirs out in Utah a couple years ago. Philip and I went out there for it. Great people, good conservative organization. And they are back in the church saying this is ridiculous. The mayor has decided it's code enforcement violation to have an 18-wheeler back up at the truck and drop off food. They would rather the church stop feeding the homeless. And, of course, a lot of people crossing the border there. They're within 5 miles of the Mexican border. A lot of people coming across the border hungry. They're helping them as well. And the mayor has just decided not to, or to shut them down. Wow. Good for the church. It's decided to file a suit and say the city has been fine with it this entire time since 1999. The city should remain fine with it. Good for them for fighting back, and good for the First Liberty Institute as well. What a wild story. And it's a Democrat mayor. All the Democrats will hear the story and say, I bet it's a Republican. Nope. It's the Democrats shutting down a church, want to run a food bank. You know, banks are shutting down around the country, regional banks in particular, because they over leverage with commercial real estate. And now there are no corporations, fewer with people in the office. So, lenders are having problems, and those are the banks. Swiss America's wants to help you protect your hard-earned assets now. Given the secret war on cash and all the turmoil in the economy, you can get their shocking report, The Secret War on Cash, for free by calling or texting 800-289-2646. The all-out war on cash includes digital forms of currency. It's spreading. Corporations and the government trying to steer you away from your money and towards plastic. Swiss America wants to give you the report, The Secret War on Cash, for free. Just call or text 800-289-2646. All you have to do is mention my name, Eric Erickson. You can text my name, Eric Erickson, to 800-289-2646, or call them. Again, 800-289-2646. You just text Eric Erickson, or when they answer the phone, say I sent you. Get the Secret War on Cash for free and talk to Swiss America about protecting your hard-earned assets. 800-289-2646. Message and data rates may apply. Welcome back across the nation. It is Eric Erickson here. The phone number, 877-973-7425. There is some breaking news happening right now. Israel has withdrawn a delegation to the White House after the White House refused to block a pro-Hamas resolution before the UN Security Council that wants a ceasefire. Biden hates Netanyahu, and Netanyahu is kind of weak in Israel, but stuff like this just helps Netanyahu. The American government seems absolutely tone deaf into how resolved across party lines Israelis are with fighting back against Hamas. Joining me, I'm going to ambush him with that, but also to talk about this wild ban on fossil fuel burning vehicles, is Senator from the great state of Nebraska, Pete Ricketts. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great, Eric. Thanks very much for having me on.
Absolutely. So let's get this one out of the gate, this breaking news, that the White House refusing after they vetoed several resolutions of the UN Security Council. Now they've led one through, and Netanyahu's withdrawn a delegation that was headed to Washington. What do you think?
Well, I think it's just absolutely terrible the way the Biden administration at first, talked the talk about supporting Israel no matter what, and now they're catering to their pro-Hamas terrorist wing of the party by backing away from Israel. I mean, this is a fight of good versus evil. Hamas is an evil terrorist organization. They committed atrocities on October 7th. There was a ceasefire on October 6th. Hamas broke it. And now Israel is doing the right thing by destroying this terrorist organization, and to cater to the left wing of the Democrat Party, who somehow sees the Hamas terrorist group as representing all Palestinians. It's just wrong. I mean, this is a terrorist group that is willing to put its own people in harm's way to fight Israel, keeping civilians as human shields. It's just an evil organization, and Israel's right. It's got to be destroyed.
It really does seem like the people who voted uncommitted in Michigan was the triggering event for this White House to back away from Israel, essentially giving a heckler's veto to people who hate Israel because they didn't vote for Biden in the Democratic primary, even though he still won over 80%. It's just like realigning Democratic Party policies towards Hamas all of a sudden.
Yeah, I got to tell you, it really is puzzling because this has got to be a really small part of their electorate, one would think. And it's really important for us as a country to make sure Israel is successful here. I mean, Hamas is as much a threat to us as Israel because they're a terrorist group funded by Iran. And Iran is looking to destroy us just like they're looking to destroy Israel. So we have an interest in making sure Hamas is destroyed here. And now the Biden administration is backing away from Israel. And by the way, Israel, is the only really true democracy in the Middle East. They share our values. I mean, this should be a no-brainer to support them. And to see the administration do this about face is just not only really puzzling because I think the payoff for them in the election is really small, but also just from the standpoint that it's really important we support Israel, and they're not doing it.
Yeah, it just I don't understand this administration other than it's a group of academics operating like academics, which gets me to this academic question of climate change and the internal combustion engine. And I was kind of stunned they decided to go through with this effort, which they're saying is not a ban of the internal combustion engine, that vehicles can decide, auto manufacturers can decide for themselves how they want to comply with the emissions. But ultimately, the only way to comply with emissions is to stop making fossil fuel burning vehicles.
Yeah, I mean, it really is de facto ban the way they wrote the regulation. And they tried to say, we loosened it up a little bit. Not true. The final, emissions compliance in 2032 is the same. So it really is a de facto ban on internal combustion engines. And, coming from a state like Nebraska, which is heavily rural, it does not work for us. Lincoln and Omaha, EVs can work, but not when you get outside. We have many cities that actually don't have any chargers at all or are 45 minutes from the nearest charger, towns like Alliance and Bloomfield and Valentine. And the other thing, too, is this is going to drive up the cost of used vehicles. And why is that important? Well, your low-income family in America spends about $12,000 on a car. A lot of times that's going to be a used vehicle, right? So you're talking about taking away a pathway to prosperity and a pathway out of poverty by taking away a car, because that's how people, especially in places like Nebraska, get to work. And you're now saying to these low-income families, you're not going to be able to take that job. You're not going to be able to find that better job to be able to help your family out. And so it's going to actually hurt these low-income families. I mean, an average EV costs $53,000. And again, a low-income family is going to spend $12,000. You can give them a $7,500 credit for buying a car. It's not going to get them there, right? It's just terrible the way the administration is ignoring the reality of where we are in this country with regard to how we can reduce the impact on the environment, and especially when we have other alternatives like biofuels, which we do here in Nebraska, to be able to offer solutions. I mean, we shouldn't dictate from the government how to address this. We should let American innovation solve the problem.
Well, and I was going to ask you about that and biofuels as well, because if you get rid of the internal combustion engine, it's not just the fossil fuel manufacturers who get out of business. There are a lot of farmers who grow corn specifically to convert to ethanol to comply with government mandates. So you're not just killing Texas and Oklahoma oil industry, but the Iowa and Nebraska farm industry as well.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just at a facility that was a combination of Green Plains, which is an ethanol company, and Shell Oil, that they've got to combine their technologies in a really creative, innovative way to be able to get even more energy and protein out of a kernel of corn, which will be a fantastic innovation to be able to help get this to, for example, sustainable aviation fuel. And, and also, just there's all sorts of applications that batteries are not going to work. And this administration refuses to acknowledge the basics of math and physics. And frankly, it's going to be to the detriment of, the families who can afford it the least.
Now, okay, so as a practical aspect, what can Congress do? I know there are ways for Congress to roll back regulations, and I think depending on how they're structured, you can't filibuster in some cases. But what is the mechanism that Congress might be able to get involved with this on?
Yeah, so this is where Senator Dan Sullivan of Alaska and I have introduced a Congressional Review Act to basically block the implementation of this rule. So the EPA just finalized this rule this past week. We've introduced what's called a CRA, Congressional Review Act, to overturn the rule. And we're hopeful to get it passed through the Senate because there are a lot of senators who have, rural constituents that this is not going to work very well, or, a lot of senators who are willing to just actually look at the math and say, hey, this isn't going to work. And then anybody who opposes it will have to explain to their voters why they don't want low-income families to have cars, why they don't want people in rural areas to be able to get to work. And if they, aren't going to, go do what their constituents want, hopefully their constituents will hold them accountable in the upcoming election. And frankly, if it gets to President Biden's desk and he vetoes it, he will own this EV mandate and, again, have to explain to the people of America why he doesn't want low-income families to have cars.
Yeah, so much of what this administration does, I read when he came into office, he had a greater percentage even than Obama of academics and people who worked in nonprofit charitable sector as opposed to people who worked in the private sector. And whether it's trying to get rid of your water heater or your stove or your dishwasher, you name it, this sounds great, I guess, in academics, but there's just no relation to how the poor and the middle class in this country operate, who sometimes have to buy the incandescent light bulb because they can't afford the LED light bulb, even though it's going to last them a lot longer.
I mean, the problem here is you've got an administration with an agenda. I even wonder if they truly believe that they want to reduce the amount of carbon in the environment, because all they have is it's a big government socialist type mentality where you say, hey, we're government, we know the right solution, now you, America, go do it. But that's not the way we solve our problems here. If you look at America, what we do is we innovate out of our problems. And the way we do that is by allowing our entrepreneurs, our inventors, the market, be able to figure out solutions to this country's problems and then go with those. And we have the ability to do that with this as well, except the government keeps, the Biden administration keeps trying to tell us what to do. And that's just ultimately not going to be something that is going to be successful because they're just not that smart. I mean, they just are not smart to know what is something is going to work 10 years from now. And frankly, again, if you want 2/3 of all cars and trucks sold in this country be EVs, I've talked to them about, well, where are you going to get the power generation? Where are you going to get the transmission? Where are you going to get the rare earth elements? For the most part, they have no answers and they have no plan for how to actually do this.
Yeah, particularly in colder environments, batteries don't sustain themselves. And I have a hard time believing that a farmer in Nebraska is going to be able to drive his combine across the field with the battery and then have to wait a day for it to charge to get back. None of that seems to make sense. And if you get rid of all the fossil fuels for the cars, it's going to make the gas even more expensive for the farmers.
Yeah, Eric, you're right. I mean, first of all, you saw what happened in Chicago, I'm sure, when they hit that really bitterly cold weather.
Right.
It only takes about 20 degrees before a car battery can lose about 41% of its charge. And, the story in Chicago was, car graveyards and dead robots because people couldn't get to chargers. They couldn't get a charge in their car, and their cars weren't reliable anymore. And frankly, this is why now you're seeing a bunch of people not buying EVs anymore because they get in cold weather it doesn't work. The other thing about going to, if you're talking, whether you're talking about a tractor or a semi truck, if you're talking about these big applications, you need really heavy batteries. Well, that means for like a truck, you're going to cut its carrying capacity by about half, which means you're going to need twice as many trucks on the road and twice as many truck drivers, which we don't have. And in the farming industry, when you add a bunch of weight, what you actually do is compress the soil more, which means that you actually can't grow as much, which means you're going to have to, cultivate more farmland, which, of course, the environmentalists don't like that either. You're not going to get as high yields. You're going to actually end up spending more energy to produce the food that we need to feed our nation. And again, this is the part of the problem with the Biden administration. They just don't know, or as I guess Ronald Reagan used to say, there's so much they know that isn't so.
Very well said. Senator, got to leave it there. I don't want to ambush you with this, but I will tell you that we're going to reach out to your staff and see if we can finally get you this year to our gathering in Atlanta. We'd love to have you in August. Don't want you to have to make a commitment to it. We'll work with your staff on it, but would love to have you. And thank you, as always, for stopping by here.
Great. Well, hey, if it works in the schedule, I'd love to come down.
That'd be fantastic. Senator Pete Ricketts, senator from Nebraska, formerly the governor of Nebraska, and his family also owns my, I guess I should say now, second favorite baseball team in America, the Cubs. They have been my first, but living in Atlanta for as long as I have, I've been rooting for the Braves for quite a while. In fact, my wife and kids for my birthday got me tickets to the Braves-Cubs game. So that's where I kind of sit on my hands and cheer for both sides because I really do like the Cubs. I was loving them when they were not making it to the World Series. So it was great a few years ago to get them there. And I was invited by the Ricketts to go, and I couldn't. So I missed that opportunity. Another 100 years, maybe they'll get back to it. In any event, thanks to Senator Ricketts for coming by. Now, I got to tell you guys before we get out of here, Americans for Prosperity has bought Bidenomics.com, the great website to show you all about the Biden economic agenda and how bad it actually is for America. Bidenomics.com, brought to you by Americans for Prosperity. So here's the thing. You go to Bidenomics.com, you send your friends and family who think the economy is fine, and it actually shows you Joe Biden's quotes and then the truth of how things are or aren't working with the economy based on what he said, and typically not. It's a great website that is factual, that is data-driven, and that shows you Joe Biden embraced this term Bidenomics, and Bidenomics is failing it for the middle class. Bidenomics.com is brought to you by Americans for Prosperity. As always, you can go to americansforprosperity.org/Eric, sign up with them, become an activist in your community. They're a do tank, not a think tank. They do the business of the conservative movement around the country, but they really want you to go check out Bidenomics.com and learn the truth about Biden's terrible economic record. Welcome. It is Eric Erickson here. This hour of the program brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan in Noonan, Georgia. And I say that because some of you think, well, they're just in Georgia, they can't help me. But they're in Noonan. They're not in D.C. or New York, but they help companies around the United States and all 50 states grow their businesses. Where you see opportunity and your lender's giving you a hard time, First Liberty's been helping businesses become big businesses since the 90s. They're still in business. They still want to help. If you're buying a building, building a building, buying a franchise, deals like that, you need $250,000 or more, reach out to them. FirstLibertyGA.com. FirstLibertyGA.com. See if they can help your business. Now, I got to move on to other things. But first, I want to go back to this Frank Luntz comment from Friday. This is Frank Luntz. He was on with CNN talking about the Attorney General of New York wanting to seize Trump's properties.
All right, Frank, the politics of this. Folks in the Biden campaign are already starting to refer to Donald Trump as broke Don, which is interesting. And then there is the possibility that the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, would have to start or would start seizing assets, maybe even buildings. How do you think that would play?
I want you to remember this moment, and don't forget it. If the New York Attorney General starts to take his homes away, starts to seize his assets, it's all going to be on camera. Pundits are going to sit there and scream about this. This man cannot be elected. You're going to create the greatest victimhood of 2024, and you're going to elect Donald Trump. If they take his stuff, he's going to say that this is proof that the federal government and the establishment and the swamp in Washington and all the politicians across the country and the attorneys generals and all of this, that this is a conspiracy to deny him the presidency. He's going to go up in the polls just like he went up every single time they indicted him. The indictment, let's not talk about whether it's justified or not, but it will prove the things that he's saying on the campaign trail, and he will go up, and it may just elect him president. Do not forget that. And I say this to the Attorney General right now. If you play politics on this, this is what the secretaries of state did in Colorado and what they did in, I believe, was Maine. His numbers went up in both states. I don't understand. I'm almost speechless in how pathetic the opposition to Trump has been and how completely misguided. And this is a perfect example of it.
Yep. He's right. And so the Court of Appeals in New York today has told Donald Trump, if you can come up with, I think, $175 million in the next 10 days, you're not going to have to post that bond for $450 some odd million. It's a huge PR win for Donald Trump today that essentially even the New York Court of Appeals suggesting that the original verdict against him is too excessive and denies him a due process right. It pauses the Attorney General's ability to go after his properties. The Democrats are doing everything they can to get Donald Trump elected, and they don't even realize it. It's like Donald Trump's primary opponents couldn't fathom they were actually helping Donald Trump. The Democrats make it even worse. I decided not to cut the clip today, but Stu Stevens, who works for Lincoln Project, used to work for, I think, McCain, Romney. He did work saying Republicans are fighting all these losing cultural war battles. The Republicans are winning the culture war right now because progressives have gotten so far out there, whether it's trying to ban the internal combustion engine in vehicles or put boys in girls' sports or abortion on demand. They feel like they're running away with that one on the left right now. They're getting so cocky, they're about to sabotage themselves on that one with abortion on demand until the moment after birth. The GOP understands the age we're living in and the moment we're living in. And the Democrats don't seem to right now. The Democrats have catered themselves towards a small fringe progressive base of anti-Semites, and it's not going to work well for them. It genuinely is not going to work well for them. Now, when we come back, a part of this progressive meltdown played out on Meet the Press on Sunday, where the rage over Ronna McDaniel becoming a contributor to NBC for money.